Hello, welcome to Channels, the Nextflow podcast. You're listening to episode number 38, going out on May the 28th, 2024. Today, really excited to have an episode all about some of the new announcements that just came out at the Nextflow Summit Boston, which happened last week. And together to help me with that, we have Evan. Hi, Evan.
Hey, folks, how's it going? Just back from Boston on the weekend and a little bit jet lagged, a little bit sleep deprived, but very happy to be here.
With very little notice as well. I need to apologize for that. It's been a busy week or so. I mean, I feel like social media and stuff has been pretty packed. We've had so many announcements kind of coming out back to back.
Yeah, not just that. I think it's like the kind of weeks and months leading up to it as well. We've really gone to a cadence of really releases twice a year, or kind of big releases twice a year. And that's gives an opportunity for everyone to come together and really kind of pull together and work towards those. A lot of, I guess, like you described it as type 2 fun, building up to it. But yeah, when the stuff comes together and it comes out like that, obviously, it makes me feel very happy. And yeah, a lot of cool stuff to talk about today.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Before we kick off, I'm just going to point to the fact that all of the talks and everything from the summit are available online. So if you go to summit.nextflow.io, click on Boston, and then go to agenda. And then as I scroll down here, if I go to the summit itself, you can see all the talks here. And each one of these has got a little button on. So if you go through and see the detail page, you can view the YouTube recordings. So if you want to see these as if you were sat in the audience, if you missed it, you can go through and catch up on all of these videos when you get a moment. And they're really some great talks at this year's event. I was watching remotely. I really, really enjoyed it.
Yeah, and kudos to you, Phil, and the team for pulling those together so quickly. It's great to be able to kind of share that so fast after the event as well.
So, Evan, give us just a quick recap of some of the top things which were announced and released last week.
Yeah, we can start from the top in terms of the quick things, and I'm going to keep the focus sort of mostly on the Seqera things, although there is a whole bunch of sort of Nextflow and multi-QC announcements that came out as well. The first kind of two are really a kind of shift up in terms of what we have on Seqera IO. We've launched what we call Seqera Pipelines, which is a place where people can find all open source pipelines. So extending a little bit of the work that was being done from NF Core in terms of a collection of pipelines that just work, and just kind of making that available for everyone. What's also sort of really exciting is coming out around containers and Seqera Containers. We're going to show a demo of that, but it's essentially a way to be able to build containers on the fly and really make containers open for everyone and make them a lot easier. So those are kind of two new big releases, which are public. There's sort of idea to be like open science resources that folks can use. On the kind of more infra compute side of things, we also launched Seqera Compute in private preview. And this is a way that you can have compute on the fly. It means that if you don't want to necessarily create an AWS account or manage your own cloud environment or have access to a cluster when you're running there, you can basically just spin up compute on the fly. And we kind of build in a lot of optimizations on that. So that was like another kind of project which we're sort of keen to see kicked off. We've had SRA-Explorer go into general availability. And this is really a tool that allows you to browse object storage, including public resources, view those. And then sort of finally on the big releases, we put into really kind of public preview data studios. And this is the ability to have interactive environments, things like Jupyter, RStudio, VS Code, spin up exactly where your computer is running. So next to your data, either coming from a pipeline, or you could use this for any kind of data analysis. And the concept there is to really make it much more close to what you have with Nextflow, the idea of using containers, of using Git, of using kind of cloud data, kind of bring all that together and make that whole experience modern and at the same time still sort of running your environment. So that was kind of the big things that we had, say from the Seqera side, but obviously a load of other things came out and also some nice announcements from some partners as well.
Yeah, fantastic. Yeah, and I mean, there's some great live demos from both you and Paolo and Rob Syme at the summit showing off all this stuff and showing the power and the flex. I think we'll probably have follow-up podcast episodes a little bit in the future talking more about studios and stuff, because I think it's a really exciting thing for everyone in the Nextflow ecosystem. But today we're gonna focus on those first two you mentioned, right? Which is kind of the open source community aspect of things and pipelines and containers. What was the motivation for what kicked off these projects?
It was coming from a couple of things. We'd really seen that the kind of success of NF Core and how folks were sort of coming there, but also sort of a wider set of people who were wanting to create pipelines publicly including the likes of like sequencing providers. So I think Oxford Nanopore is sort of the best example of this with their epitome pipelines, and really wanted to kind of provide visibility for them so that people could have that same experience with sort of launching a pipeline that just really is going to work out of the box. That kind of drove us to start thinking about how we kind of go about and do that. We looked and scraped all of GitHub for Nextflow pipelines as a kind of a starting point, really to kind of see what the universe of Nextflow pipelines that sort of exist out there. And then really did a manual creation process on a kind of subset of those, the ones that we thought were most likely to run, and then be able to put them into, test them with defined configuration, ideally with some test data. And those are the kind of the ones that we ended up sort of launching with there. The idea is to really bring together all of the resources, kind of make it much easier for folks who are wanting to run pipelines and sort of in their environment, but just kind of open it up to a whole different way of building pipelines as well.
Yeah, very cool. So, I mean, if I hop onto Seqera.io, I mean, we can see a couple of things off the bat. Anyone familiar with the website might notice that the navigation bar along the top is different. And I mean, pipelines and containers, they're now prime place in the main nav bar, which is a competitive place to be.
And I think the rationale there is for really to make it a resource that's just so easy for folks to use, and they just come in and they're able to sort of find those resources straight away as well.
Yeah. When I drop in here, and I mean, you said it's beyond NF Core. The first thing I see is there are quite a lot of NF Core pipelines here.
There's a sorting mechanism going on here where we're sorting by stars, and of course, sort of the NF Core pipelines have the most visibility, which is obviously fantastic. What we also saw, and I guess one of the learnings from this exercise, which we've run over the last couple of weeks, essentially validating all of the pipelines that we found, is that the universe of Nextflow pipelines is there's a lot of variety there in terms of the quality. When people are developing these pipelines, not everyone is building them necessarily, say, in an environment which is very compatible, and this is mostly around test data, the biggest thing that we saw. So not having a small test data set that sits alongside your pipeline makes it very difficult for a third party to go and test. And that, I guess, is the biggest kind of shortcoming that we saw in terms of the wider universe. Obviously, the standards that NF Core has really made that a lot more easy for folks to do that, and almost the quality there just means that the NF Core pipelines are highly represented here.
And I mean, we can see if I filter on the side here, you can see the epitome pipelines you talked about from Nanopore, and we've got Fred Hutch and Arcadia and a few others here. And I guess when you talk about this, in order for pipelines to be here, we actually someone at Seqera sat down and ran it, and it had to run all the way to the end, which is a pretty stringent set of criteria. Does it end here, or are we kind of planning to add more pipelines over time, or what if folks miss the pipeline that they expect to see?
Yeah, so far we've sort of had run this as almost an internal effort with the team to manually go through and do this. Next steps for this is to really turn this into much more of like a community-driven piece. That will start with us sort of reaching out to some of the authors of some of the other pipelines that we think could fit here very easily, and really get their support and help. Some of that is going to be like, for example, hosting test data, which is something that sort of we already do via NF Core. So making that more visible and easy for folks. I think the other big thing that's really that's sort of missing here that will take it to the next level is the ability to have versioning on pipelines. So we have made these run with the small test data sets because that's obviously like the first thing you can do to check that it works. But if you are, for example, running an RNA-seq pipeline and you've got different references that you want to call those as a different sort of a name, different version of that pipeline, this is not so much a revision, but more of a combination of the Git repository, any of the kind of revisions that you have, like maybe you have version 3.1.2, and you want to have a profile like human, for example, which points exactly to a specific genome reference. So being able to wrap all of that so you can have the same sort of workflow or pipeline here with these different profiles, and then it'll make it much easier for folks to be able to pre-configure those, and we can kind of go to a bit more stringent testing, and then kind of get once we've sort of shown exactly how that works, really try and encourage the rest of the community to really kind of build their pipelines in this way to do that.
That's cool. And in the meantime, I noticed down in the FAQ here on the side, there's one that says, how can I submit my own pipeline? And I think there's a form here. So as a kind of a until the full thing is built out, people can also sort of get in touch with us that way, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. We'd be more than happy to show how this works. I guess behind the scenes, what we've done is we had really took all of the pipelines that we've got from GitHub, we placed them into Seqera platform. Then we were able to really kind of manually go through and curate, and we want to make that process more seamless. And that really just makes it much easier for folks to be able to go from their pipelines that they're developing to be able to like publish them in a sense. And it's still just like a Git repository plus that kind of metadata makes it available. The kind of idea around this, it's very much following the model of Hugging Face. So we've done very well of almost thinking about the models as somewhat Git repositories in the sense that there's code there and there's data there, but it's also the kind of the metadata which is relevant for the execution of, let's say, like a Hugging Face model. And while they have models and the like, we can really go to having sort of pipelines and containers.
Mm. As you say, I mean, the way that we put this together was built on the metadata and everything which Seqera platform already has around pipelines. We did it by running pipelines and then exporting that as JSON. So it's kind of a nice. We're kind of dog fooding a bit there.
Absolutely, and you can imagine making this transition. We're using the CLI for this and the API, but it's very, very easy to be able to kind of build this once we're sort of really confident, let's say, of the primitives. I think another thing I'd point out would be the ability for you to take those pipelines and to run them into enterprise environments. So when people have their own version of Seqera, say they have this as part of their large pharma company or the like, they can choose the API endpoint. And this is, I would say, very much inspired by another website called SRA-Explorer, which maybe, Phil, you can explain a little bit more about how that came about and the kind of idea around that.
Yeah, I mean, SRA-Explorer is a little side project I started years and years ago, where I just got frustrated with the interface on the NCBI sequence read archive. It found it really slow to get data, so I put this together and basically as a little excuse to teach myself how to use AngularJS, which dates it slightly. But what I did more recently, I guess, then was I figured that we have all these metadata here, and we have a Seqera platform API, so I just plugged the two together. And so in SRA-Explorer, I did this little kind of proof of concept where you can choose an organization and a workspace and give the metadata a dataset name and then click a button and it ends up in Seqera platform. So, and I guess it's kind of a similar kind of setup with Seqera Pipelines, right? What was your demo? I think you demoed at the summit about rare disease, right?
Yeah, and shout out to the rare disease pipeline authors as well. I chose that about a week before, maybe less, before doing that. I was able to get everything running from end to end, including some interactive analysis around that. So shout out to the folks developing that pipeline.
Very cool.
That was the one I chose, and really as part of that, I was able to build that in straight away and go from there.
I was thinking of doing a podcast episode pretty soon with those folks, actually. I haven't told them this yet, so if they're listening, they might be surprised, but I'm probably going to be knocking on their door anyway. Yeah, okay, so I found my pipeline that sounds interesting. I hit launch. I haven't set it up, so I need to put in an access token, and this is a temporary thing, right? We're not going to have the access token requirement forever.
Yeah, and in this way, like maybe if you select, so for example, in the cloud one, you're just selecting the Seqera cloud one, but if you have an enterprise deployment, you can put in your own API endpoint there, as well as your own token, which kind of makes that relevant there. But for most folks, it's really just putting in the Seqera token. That's really easy to get by generating that inside of the platform. And once you've done it once, it essentially sits there, and you can sort of export any pipelines that you see and that are relevant for you.
So I'm just doing this in another window. I've got my access token. Hit next. And there we go. Beautiful. And that should be stored in the browser, so I shouldn't have to do that every time. And then I can add this pipeline to any of my organizations. I think this is the one I was using for testing the other day. Choose a workspace, select a compute environment, and then hit add pipeline. And
once you've kind of got this idea of sort of using the token there, you can imagine that we're building out essentially having a centralized authentication system across that. So you can have the same ID in the pipelines here as in the platform, as in the forum, as in many of the other places that you kind of use this across the community. It makes it very easy to be able to do that. We're also thinking to add in here functionality around things like comments, kind of commentary on the individual pipelines as well, to really facilitate more collaboration.
Yeah, I mean, that'd be great to have a kind of a centralized place where you can see whether other people are. Because I mean, again, with NF Core, we've got the NF Core Slack, and there's kind of an obvious kind of community home for that. But to have a place where you can see comments from other people using these pipelines all in one interface would be great. And then this isn't just adding the whole pipeline to the workspace, right? This is more than just more than just that. So if I go through to launch, I should be able to see in this interface when it loads up with all the different parameters and everything that this has been pre-configured.
Yeah, absolutely. This has got like, it will take your profiles, for example, that you set. In some cases, like within NF Core pipelines, you might want to set out dir. That can often be a requirement. You can be able to set different test data as like parameter inputs as well. So all of that can be predefined, and this is sort of where we're going towards with this concept of like a pipeline version, which is really the kind of locking down of just the repository plus the profiles plus everything else which is required to launch in kind of version from there.
I mean, I can see on this page there's all these different kind of test data sets which are pre-configured in this launch form. So I can just hit launch. I don't have to do anything else and it will run. Very cool. And then finally, I mean, there's more to pipelines than just Seqera platform, I guess. So I need to remember how to do it now, but there is a way to do it. There you go, launch pipeline. There's ways to use these pipelines outside of platform as well, right? So we've got the Seqera command line interface, and then commands for Nextflow and NF Core themselves as well, which is cool. But they don't come with the test data, is that right?
They should. It's going to be dependent a little bit on like exactly how it's defined. If the profile works like test, it's going to work. If there's like other stuff behind the scenes that we've had to do to pull in test data that's not part of that profile, it's essentially data which is not in the repo, then it's a little bit harder.
Yeah. Okay, so it's interesting because one of the questions I've had from people is like, why is this needed? Well, I mean, there are other kind of services already which list pipelines as obviously NF Core, but we know that's just tied to NF Core pipelines. But there's also like Workflow Hub and Doc-Store and stuff. But I mean, this is a level of kind of metadata around these pipelines which doesn't exist in any of those other providers, I guess.
Yeah, in some ways, it's about kind of setting a slightly higher standard than that as it applies, and also it's in a way that we can, at least on a first version, kind of build this out. There's nothing incompatible though here with say what's available and some of the other like sort of more standards around this or Doc-Store, and we'd be happy to support those to make that. For us, it's like some ways it's like moving quickly a little bit to kind of build this out and then kind of be able to map it back to what we see. I think that the biggest thing for us is about having high quality pipelines in there that we can guarantee run. And when we looked at, tested out some of those other ones, we kind of realized got to the point that there was kind of really no substitute for, absolutely actually testing each one by one and being able to kind of make those changes directly as opposed to kind of relying on the author necessarily of a Git repository forcing that update before we kind of do something. So that's kind of the process that we've gone through in that order.
Yeah, brilliant. I'm really excited to see how this goes in the future. I feel like this is kind of a really good starting point. It's a good launch point already to be able to get such a small window from finding a pipeline to running it and seeing it work in your environment, like on your compute and in your workspace and everything. So I'm kind of excited to see what people think of this and how much it gets used, and especially as we bulk it out a bit more and get a few more pipelines in there.
Yeah. But I've got a feeling you're more excited about something else, Phil.
I'm not. That's not fair. I'm excited about both of them. But yeah, no. The next topic, if you push me to it, is kind of part two of this offering, right? We've got along that top bar, we've got pipelines, and then next to it is containers. I mean, give us an intro to what we're looking at here. I mean, what is Seqera Containers?
Yeah, so we'd seen like a couple of challenges in the past. I guess the origins of this in terms of like a problem date back quite a few years, where people want to be able to build containers easily. There was some services out there, particularly the most popular one had been biocontainers, and that had done like a really good job, particularly for like individual packages or packages kind of building directly from Bioconda. What we saw though is like as soon as you needed to add like multiple packages inside of into a container, and then if you kind of wanted that to kind of build very quickly, or as soon as you had like different architecture, the kind of flow for how that worked and kind of serving those wasn't kind of necessarily like the most optimal experience. And anyone who's played time or had some time with the meld containers is kind of sort of aware of that. So the first thing around Seqera Containers was the idea of like, how can we like build containers very kind of quickly to sort of serve that. And I guess the opportunity for this came up very much from really Wave, and that was sort of released 18 months ago or so, which is an open source tool, which has developed the idea is to kind of just-in-time containers or build containers sort of on the fly as you require them. What I guess Seqera Containers is doing is it's using sort of Wave as a backend to be able to build those containers on the fly. It's also been able to kind of leverage some of the package managers that exist, so things like Bioconda, but it's gone further than that, and also includes some of the Python packaging tools. And then it's also kind of able to do this and serve this for multiple architectures and multiple different kind of container formats. So you've got Docker and Singularity, etc. I guess what's the most satisfying thing around this is that we're able to kind of serve all of those on AWS, for free for anyone running pipelines anywhere. And that I think can turn into a really kind of powerful bioinformatics resource.
And when you say AWS, does that mean that people need to be running their compute on AWS, or it's just the infrastructure?
No, absolutely not. So the way that it works is those images essentially push to AWS, and then we're serving them via Cloudflare. So they're actually kind of cached and available anywhere. It's just that the containers themselves, firstly, like there's a lot of containers, like there's actually almost infinite, but not quite infinite. I guess there's infinite. It depends on how fast sort of software development is going on, as well as like just the serving of those. So that creates like a lot of traffic. You can imagine every time you run a task of a pipeline, it's going to be pulling down, sometimes gigs of container image before you launch. So being able to really find a place to do that, and that's really where the partnership with AWS came in to kind of like help us, sort of run a piece of that infrastructure.
Very cool. But I can still pull them to my local laptop or even to my HPC or whatever.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Very cool. So, I mean, you went through a lot of features there pretty quickly. Firstly, I think it's really interesting to talk about where this came from, like the stuff you mentioned with mold containers, I think, and the flipping of the kind of the logic of the order of things which are done. So I mean, Biocontainers builds off Bioconda at the time that a package is uploaded or built. So that means every single Bioconda package has an image, irrespective of whether it's ever used. And also the other thing is, it means if you update, I think the classic one, for example, is SAMtools. If you want to update your version of SAMtools, then it has to update every single mold container, and it's a very expensive kind of build operation. But by flipping it the other way around, so that stuff is only kind of built on request, we sidestep all of those issues.
And I think you really, I guess it comes to light a little bit when you start building Nextflow pipelines, particularly on the kind of development phase with Nextflow and Wave. And then you kind of get that experience where you're just like defining, I just need this package and I just need this version of it. And once you sort of saw that, it was kind of very evident. I think that what Seqera Containers is going to do is kind of open that up to the world beyond just Nextflow users, and also kind of even beyond just like the workflow people, like people who build pipelines. Ideally, it should make containers a lot more accessible for like broader folks. And really make containers kind of one of the key primitives that we can build scientific applications on.
Yeah, I was thinking about that over the weekend, actually. I mean, we've got the Nextflow training material that we deliver, and a whole chunk of that is all about explaining what containers are, explaining how you build a container with a Docker file, and like working through all the logic, because building a container or a set of containers has been a big part of pipeline development. But with this, that just goes away. You just don't even need to think about it. You just give the name of the package you want, and you get your containers without really having to, they're just there.
Yeah, I think a demo is really one of the things that kind of makes this more evident here.
Yeah, exactly. That's talking. I mean, anyone who's listening to audio, don't worry too much. You can just go to seqera.io/containers, but I'm going to just do a quick run through here. So if I'm going to pick multi-QC. Always pick multi-QC. So I just typed in. It gave me the Bioconda search result here, and it's added it up to the top. And I can see also on the side, I'm searching PyPI, Bioconda, and Conda Forge. But then if I hit get container, and there it is. That was easy. So I've got a Docker URI, and I can just hit copy and put that into whatever code or command I need. But then I guess the magic is, like you say, these kind of what would otherwise be multi-containers. So if I have BWA and I want to pipe into SAM tools, I can kind of add BWA and SAM tools and hit get container, and it just generates it on the fly. And I can see the URL is communitywave.seqera.io, and then it's got both of these tools in. And I can keep adding more in as I need to, which is just super cool.
What's the plan with NF Core as it relates to these kind of building containers on the fly?
Good question. We were discussing it just this morning on the NF Core Slack. I mean, my hope very much is we switch to using these containers. I think it makes a lot of sense. One of the only complications is that NF Core pipelines need to work offline. So whether we'll actually directly be using the Wave service to get these URLs, or whether we'll kind of hard code the URLs into the pipelines, we'll see. But I'm pretty sure we're going to start building packages because it's just so much easier. Yeah, I'll come back to the Nextflow integration as well in a second, but just to kind of wrap up a bit more demos. I mean, I went to my recent containers. You can see those ones. Some of them I requested there didn't exist, so it's building them as we speak, which only takes a couple of minutes. Then I can go through and view the build details, and you can see what it did. The search results were converted into a Conda environment file. There's a standard Docker file which builds off Conda, and you can see all the logs and everything, which is very cool. But presumably, if anyone else had requested this one in advance, they would have already built it. It would already existed on the cache, and it would have just returned it straight away. Very nice. And then we've got security scan details down here as well. That one's still running. I'm going to go and find an older one back here, which is nice. So this is using Trivy, which is an open source container security software, which does scans of every single image and finds any potential security problems. And pretty soon we're going to have a button here to also download an SBOM, software bill of materials document, which is going to be really good for anyone working in kind of clinical or validation settings, where these are required files. So that's really cool.
Yeah.
I kind of go back, and the bit you were talking about over here, this is the container settings. If I can zoom in, it'll let me. We've got Docker and Singularity. And then we've got Linux, AMD, and ARM64 as well. So we're building for different types of architecture. So, I mean, where can we run ARM64 software? Is that kind of for people running their Raspberry Pis, or is there more than that?
Well, I mean, a lot of the excitement was coming out from last week around folks running Graviton instances. And in particular, like just some of the cost savings that exist there with some of the software. Really kind of depends on how the software is built, whether it's like you get any sort of advantage from running ARM there, but there is some really significant, really almost kind of free sort of speed ups that you get as it relates to this. And this makes that whole process much, much simpler to be able to do there.
And Graviton, that's the AWS instances, and that's kind of, it's a bit like how Apple Silicon, where Apple have come out with their own processor, Amazon decided to do the same thing, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I believe that there's previously been some benchmarking from them on that, and it's something that we'll kind of continue to see. There's more and more support for these packages being built in ARM, so that's something which is constantly evolving as well.
Yeah, big kudos to the Bioconda community for adding in support for ARM recently.
Absolutely.
And then if I go down to Singularity, I can see that actually some of these addresses look slightly different. We've got an ORAS kind of prefix here. So these are the Singularity builds. And what's particularly cool here is that this isn't a Docker file anymore. Now we've got an actual native Singularity definition file. So this isn't being converted from Docker or anything. This is building directly into Singularity CIF format. Means you don't have to do any Docker conversion locally or anything. And pretty soon, I'm hoping we'll have a button here where you can download the HTTP flat file for the Singularity images as well. So we'll be able to just grab them from the web super easily. So, I mean, this is a web interface here. Obviously, I'm kind of clicking around, which is very nice. It's a pleasant experience to kind of play around with. But there's more to Seqera Containers than just the web interface. So the CLI is another way to do it. This is a standalone CLI. So now I'm in a kind of a terminal window here, and I can do, I've got Wave installed. So this is the Wave CLI now, and you can see all the different kind of commands I can do here. And the key here then, if I want to request a new image, I can just do wave conda package multi-QC. We've just released 122.1. So let's see if I can fetch that. And then I do freeze. Now you can see in the example command above it, it's got build repo, which tells Wave to create the image and then push it to a specific kind of Docker repositories. But if I don't do build repo and it's just a conda package, it's not a custom Docker file or anything, then that will work with Seqera containers. And you can see the URL it returns is the same base URL as the ones we were getting on the web interface. So exactly the same setup then here as we had on the web interface, but now I don't need to go anywhere. I can just do it over the CLI, which is obviously great for anyone working with automation.
And how long do those containers stay around for?
So we wanted to say forever, but that's a bit scary. I think I might have said forever on Twitter, but I probably shouldn't. But I think we've committed to at least 5 years since the pipeline has been created. We've talked to the folks we're working with at AWS who are supporting us in terms of some of the infrastructure costs and also the costs we're bearing. And everyone's pretty committed to this project. We know that reproducibility is really important. So there's no point in doing this if we can't promise that the containers are going to stick around, because people need to be able to reproduce the analysis exactly years down the line. So yeah, 5 years is hopefully a pretty solid amount of time. And then the final thing, we've had the web interface, the CLI, and then there's also the Nextflow integration. And this is a blog post that went out today on the Nextflow website about the release highlights of 24.04, which is the latest stable release of Nextflow that just went out. And the top section then is about Seqera containers. And you can see this is to go into a Nextflow config file. There's just 3 lines to enable Wave, to tell Wave to freeze the image so that it's built and stored, and then tell Wave to use the conda packages which are being specified, and not any custom Docker files or anything, because we don't allow them on the public repository. And that's it. Then if you run your pipeline, and you have conda packages specified in your Nextflow pipeline, those will be picked up by Wave, requested from the Seqera containers, built on demand, and then stored in Seqera containers for any subsequent runs. And could also be Singularity images if you have Singularity.enabled switched on. So if you're building Nextflow pipelines, you can forget about the CLI, you can forget about the web interface. You just write your pipeline, put that into a config file, and hit go, and just the magic happens.
Yeah, I had a similar experience, sort of like using this really for the first time, I think towards the end of last year. And just in terms of like, I was running a pipeline which was just doing some sort of LangChain sort of fun LLM work, and just the constant kind of package changing that I had to do with each process, all of the different dependencies. This really just made it so much simpler in terms of just having a conda file associated with each of the processes as I was developing the pipeline. It was just incredible, the kind of time saving that this has, and kind of brings the containers much more to something that you do as part of the development, and then can make very easily transition from that into scaled up and production and cloud environments, etc.
So, I mean, we've got the Nextflow website here, and obviously with the Nextflow company, you hinted a little bit earlier on that, I mean, this isn't tied to those pieces of software. Do you have any kind of ideas or aspirations for who might be using this?
So as I mentioned before, like containers have primarily been used by people who are running workflows. My feeling is this is a necessity from the complexity of the workflows. When you have 50 different steps, it really becomes impractical for kind of doing that manual installation, and really containers become really key. What I guess who hasn't necessarily benefited from that is the kind of broader audience of scientists. So if we think about people who are doing things like inside of a notebook, maybe they're not running batch computation, but it's more interactive analysis. The way we've kind of positioned this, when we've been thinking about this for a while, is how can we really advance science for everyone with software? And everyone here meaning not just people who love writing pipelines, but that kind of broader scientific audience. Now, for us, like the one so obvious way to do that is to firstly make the containers easier to use, like we've just shown there, but also then kind of integrate that kind of experience inside of an environment that they're more comfortable with. And for us, that's really like studio environment. This is a containerized execution environment, which is linked to your data. which you can mount your data in using Fusion or any object storage there, and then can start running things in this way. And that kind of experience there is kicked off in a public preview. And the idea is there's just so many more scientists working in those environments, and they can kind of take advantage of all the portability, all the reproducibility that comes with using containers and cloud. And ideally kind of open this up to a much sort of broader set and ideally do better science.
I mean, we've talked about it. We've done some demos here. Where can people find out more? I mean, there's the website itself, which I showed, Seqera.io. Is there anything else that people can read?
Yeah, so there's a whole bunch of blog posts which have gone out recently as well, like probably in the last week or so, where people can kind of find those announcements. There's some fantastic sort of GIFs as well that we have that are kind of showing the process very quickly. So if you don't want to necessarily go through and try it yourself, but you can, of course, try it yourself as well, and then onto like Seqera.io. The work as it relates to kind of studios as well is something which is available as well to everyone as well. You can try that on the community showcase and inside your own computer environment.
And then there's the Summit website. And if anyone has any suggestions for feedback, then there's also this kind of button on the left here, and people can hop in to our feedback system. And there's categories for both Seqera Containers and Pipelines, where you can drop in suggestions for things you'd like to see or tell us about anything you think is broken. Hopefully it won't be too much of a latter. Brilliant. All right. Evan, thanks so much for your time today. And thanks everyone for listening. We're really excited to hear what everyone does with these new toys and see how they're adopted by the community. Yeah, hopefully we'll be able to drop back soon with some kind of metrics about usage and some stories about how these are affecting people's workflows, both bioinformatics workflows, but also kind of actual day-to-day workflows.
Absolutely. And thanks a lot for having me on here, Phil. Hope to be back soon. But just a shout out as well to all the folks who have been kind of working on this, as well as all the people who are contributing pipelines back to the open source, as well as that software. I think it's really making a difference, and really appreciate all your work. So keep it up. Thanks a lot, folks.
Great stuff. Cheers. Bye.